Have you ever wondered what it means exactly to have a cognitive issue? And really, what is cognition? And how can we see evidence that there's an impairment in our loved one? In today's video, I'm going to discuss what cognition is and give some examples of what our loved ones might be struggling with. And sometimes that can allow us to address some of those areas, or at least focus on those areas as we try to do the best we can to caregive for them. As a caregiver, it can be so frustrating to have our loved one, our parent, say to us, I don't have a problem with that. I can do this. I can use the ladder to go up on the roof. I can use a step stool in the kitchen to reach something on the top shelf. A lot of times we as family members and as caregivers tend to think this is just resistance. This is stubbornness, obstinance. And it's especially hard when earlier in life, our loved one may have had a personality that was very similar to what they're demonstrating now. But with a cognitive impairment, some of these things that may have been a personality issue now might be a cognitive impairment that they don't have control over. So what might have been an earlier life willful obstinance or willful stubbornness, often with a cognitive impairment, there is no intention toward it. There is no willfulness toward it. It's a cognitive issue. It's a misconnection in the brain somewhere. A really simple definition of cognition is the content of our thoughts. It includes what we're thinking, the individual thoughts we're having, and the ability to look at the fact that we are thinking. Cognition has a lot to do with where we're putting our attention. It also includes a lot of systems in our body, our visual system, our hearing. So we take in information from all of those systems, and then another part of our cognition, the central processing system. It's where all that information from all of those other systems are taken in and made sense of. Once they're made sense of, they then send a signal back out with how to respond to it. If I see a curb coming up, the visual system sees that curb, takes it into our brain where our brain says, what does that mean? And then it will, if it's working properly, will send a signal telling our body to flex our hip up and lift our toes up so that as we step up, we're going to clear the curb. Some of the higher cognitive functions, sometimes you'll hear that term, higher cognitive functions, are the things that are often looked at when there's cognitive testing being done. So higher level cognitive functions include things like attention, the ability to put our attention on something and the ability to hold our attention on that. We might get really frustrated because it looks like our loved one just is not paying attention. When we're asking them to do something, they're not paying attention. When we watch them do something, it's like they're not paying attention. The reality is, with a cognitive impairment that affects attention, they're not able to keep their attention or put their attention where they want it to be. Another higher cognitive function is executive function, and that's basically the ability to problem solve. And that includes identifying a problem, being able to come up with a plan to overcome that problem, and the ability to adjust in that problem solving. So it might be that we start to do something with an anticipated outcome, and then we realize halfway through, oh, that's not going to work, and then we adjust our action. And then finally being able to carry out those steps toward the solution of that problem. And what many of us as caregivers struggle with is something called metacognitive issues. Metacognition is the ability to understand that we're thinking. So it's the awareness of our own thoughts and our thought processes, and the ability to see that we're thinking. What we often see with the cognitive impairment is that there's difficulty with the realization of our ability in this moment compared to maybe an earlier moment in our life. So we may think that I can use a ladder and go up on the roof because I did that when I was 40. And there's a true disconnect in my ability to see my deficits now compared to when I was 40. Another big metacognitive deficit that shows up with cognitive impairment is the ability to predict the outcome of an activity. So even if I think that I can use a ladder, get up on the roof, I've lost the ability to predict what might happen if I lost my balance up there, if I got dizzy, Another problem that you might see in metacognitive skills is the ability to plan. So although I may have been making a recipe for years and years and years, being able to follow that planning, I have to take these certain ingredients out first, and then I have to mix these first, that is often lost. Another metacognitive skill often lost in dementia is the ability to adjust and readjust. Because if we're lacking the ability to interpret and to plan, then they're also lacking the ability to understand that in the moment this is not working. So even being able to pivot and try something a little bit different is affected. Another metacognitive skill that's often impaired is self-initiation. So being able to self-start a task. If it's too difficult to plan out a task, then it makes sense that starting that task would also be difficult. So the last metacognitive skill I want to discuss is self-control. So the ability to stop something that is leading down a dangerous path. So I might get up and rush for the door when somebody's ringing the doorbell. There's often a loss of the ability to interrupt that thought pattern and remind themselves that they need to go slow. And if they can't understand what will happen, if there's difficulty looking in to see the consequences of an action, then they're not quite sure what will happen if they don't get to the door. They hear the auditory cue that they've always associated with opening the door, and maybe have trouble figuring out what the consequences are if they don't get there quickly, or if they move too quickly, or if they leave their walker and just try to run for the door. So all of these things really impact us as caregivers in how best to provide care. If we know that our loved one is unaware of their limitations, we often see evidence that they try things that are above their ability. They don't recognize their deficits or when they need help. They're often not motivated to get help or to exercise or to eat well because they don't see a problem. And often their goals are not the same as the family members or the caregivers that are around them because they just don't see any issue. So what do we do as caregivers if we realize that our loved one just doesn't have the ability and the insight to see what's actually going on? How can we effectively be a caregiver? Sometimes just understanding that our loved one isn't being stubborn or obstinate or just difficult to deal with can make caregiving a little bit easier. One of the most important things from my perspective is being able to have a heart-to-heart talk with our loved one. So even if we are going to talk about the things that we see, that's important. Sometimes telling our loved one that you've had 3 accidents in a month, you're leaving things on the stove, even if we're giving concrete evidence of what we're seeing, sometimes it still won't get through to them. But sometimes as we start to have this conversation, our loved one might very well acknowledge their own concern about some of the safety things. The most important part of all of this is being able to instill trust in the person we're caring for. So we want them to have trust in us. And that means making a connection and making sure that they're heard as you have this conversation. If we can make a connection and then ask our loved one to trust us, that we will always do things that are in their best interest, regardless of whether they are aware of it or not, and being really honest about all of this stuff. Do you trust me that I will always do things in your best interest? I'll always do things to make sure you stay safe. So we may argue because you don't see it, but I'm only going to focus on the things to keep you safe. Do you trust me to do that? Trust is a huge thing. If we can get our loved one to trust us, caregiving can be so much easier. Please watch the next video where I talk about the importance and some strategies for having that first conversation to build trust with the person you're caring for. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found it helpful or if you didn't find it helpful, please comment in the comment section below. Please like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. Also include any ideas for future videos that you'd like me to cover. Thanks.